So let's get into this. So the catalyst to us talking today is you hit me up and you said, "Yo, Dexter, Biden is maybe gonna do something that might actually be somewhat significant, but I think we need to talk about it." So lay this out for me. What is Biden getting ready to maybe do?
Okay, so as we were saying earlier, marijuana cannabis is now considered a Schedule One drug on the Controlled Substances Act, which is the piece of federal legislation that basically defines drugs in America, what's
Mm-hmm.
illegal, what's not illegal on a federal level. Um, and so the Biden administration last year directed HHS to take a look and say, like, yo, given everything we know about pot now, like, shouldn't we like maybe not consider it as bad as heroin? Like, couldn't we think about it as a
Because
different
that's what a
class of drug?
Schedule One drug is, like
Yeah.
heroin, like coke, like all these other like drugs.
I
What
actually
is
think cocaine is not a Schedule One drug because it has medical uses. Like you can use it for shit, which they think that
Jesus
pot you
Christ.
can't.
Well, no, I mean,
The, the
the whole Coca-Cola thing. You know what I mean? Like, hey, this is
yeah.
it's good for you. But well, even
So,
to get into it, like Schedule One, the definition is that it has no medical use. It's only harmful, and thus
and
it needs
highly
to be
addictive.
and highly addictive, and thus needs to be treated, with the most restrictive policy possible. That's Schedule One,
Yeah.
and we were
And
still there.
so
Okay.
we're still there. That's where it is right now. And so Biden administration's like, hey, let me direct HHS to do a review. And the review also then includes involving the Drug Enforcement Administration, the
Mm-hmm.
DEA. And per the rules of the Controlled Substances Act, there's like an 8-point assessment that they have to do to try to change things and do whatever. I'm not quite wonky enough to be able to explain that as well as maybe other people can. But the whole idea is like, yeah, they got to do the bureaucracy to make it happen.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, let's bring some of this up too. I mean, because
yeah.
I'd love to actually walk through this a little bit. So this there we go. Okay. This joint
Mm-hmm.
right here. So this is this thing you sent me, the American Veterinary Medical Association. So this is okay, so this is from late February, and this walks you through a little bit of, okay, what is the legal landscape? Again, marijuana has been classified as Schedule 1 since that list was created in 1970. And so, as you said, the Department of Health and Human Services recommended that marijuana be moved to Schedule 3, which, but one of the things that I found interesting in here, I'm trying to find where this was, but this sentence right here, so a little bit further down, so the Biden administration had as this article explains, in 2022, the Biden administration directed the HHS and the U.S. Attorney General to conduct a review of how marijuana is scheduled under federal law, just like you were explaining, these 8 points, which are, what is the actual potential for abuse? The history of current pattern of use, what risk is there to public health? A list of 8 points, which they would actually use to identify, okay, seriously, how bad is this thing? The it's the assessment that they did leaked. Like, is this why we know?
Yeah.
Are we even supposed to? This is my question. Are we even supposed to be having this conversation? Are we even supposed to know about this?
Well, I mean, it was a FOIA request that 2 lawyers put into HHS. So,
Okay.
and then they put it out to the public. So a leak might be a strong version of that. It is
Okay.
in the public interest and domain to be able to see what the government is doing.
Yeah.
However, it is like very technocratic machinations of what government agencies do.
Mhm.
So yeah, they did a 250-page scientific assessment. I didn't read it. uh,
I
but
feel like it's going to tell us stuff that mostly we know.
well, and this is sort of, I mean, this is like anything with public health, like they have to dot their I's and cross their T's on stuff.
Yeah.
It can't just be like, oh yeah, right. We all know that pot's cool. Um,
I wish
That's
that was the document that they just
yeah.
turned in like a
So
1-page PDF. Oh yeah, we all know pot's cool. It's fine,
it's cool, bro.
guys. Yeah, I
It's
would. Yeah,
fine. Come on,
it's cool,
chill.
bro. Trust us. Signature.
That's not to say that they didn't get things wrong or that there's like different shades of how people talk about things. Like I'm sure, surely people have talked about it and they should. Um, but then, so the reason I think it's important to talk about now is because this is potentially the last year of the Biden administration. It is an election year.
Mm,
Uh, Vice President Kamala Harris, in an appearance this month or this month, um, sort of mentioned that the DEA was doing its assessment at the moment and was urging
yeah.
them to go fast. Uh, and so that to me indicates that is that Fat Joe? It is, isn't it?
Yeah, that okay.
Uh,
Yeah, sorry. I've just pulled this article up. Yeah,
yeah.
on Politico. That was the same thing I had. So Politico, there's this. The article is titled "Vice President Criticizes Federal Cannabis Restrictions During White House Weed Event," and as I scrolled down, I'm like scrolling down, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Is this Fat? What is Fat Joe doing in the White House? Is anybody?" It's just like the
That's
description
a
just
great.
casually mentions him, flanked by musician Fat Joe, left, and Kentucky Governor Randy Bashar, right. Vice President Kamala Harris speaks during a roundtable. Like Fat Joe's just also Fat Joe. Fat Joe lost some weight.
He looks good. Yeah.
Shout
I,
out
I
to
mean,
Fat Joe.
I believe that he does do a good deal of advocacy for the criminal justice reform, et cetera, for
He
pot,
does, and
which a lot of people
I've
do, which
seen
is
that.
cool.
I've seen that, but like you
Yeah.
just when you least expect somebody to pop up, is that Fat Joe or am I losing my? No, that's Fat Joe. Fat Joe's sitting
Yeah.
right next to Kamala Harris. Yeah.
Well, so my prognostication and predicting things is not a great idea, but maybe it is. I think that it's very likely that before the election this year, it will be rescheduled to Schedule 3 because it has clear political benefits. It's like a good headline. Who
Mm-hmm.
knows how long it lasts for? Does it actually re-engage younger voters who might be pissed off at the Biden administration for any number of reasons? Is it the kind of thing where you do that cleave where you're just like, well, it shows a difference between who the Biden administration is and who a potential Trump 2 administration would be.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things. So I think that's kind of where my head is as like it's been 4 years. They haven't done it yet. Maybe this is an interesting election year card to throw. And what are the implications of it? And I think I think is interesting too is that there is a flank of the Democratic Party who are like, listen, that's not enough. Like we can't just reschedule it to Schedule 3. We should deschedule it entirely. Take it off the list of controlled substances. And we can go into what
Yeah.
that means and what those things are, because I think that they're intricacies that are pretty intricate, pretty interesting to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's do it because okay. So I want to put a pin in the voting part because I think that's
Sure.
important. And I want to come back to that. So what? So in this article here, we've got Kamala Harris talking. I mean, she uses the word absurd. She says the current Vice President Kamala Harris called the current classification of marijuana under federal law, quote, absurd during a White House event on Friday. Okay. So what is it that they're potentially going to do? What does it look like is in the actual pipeline? This, the scheduling to Schedule 3. What does that mean? What does it not mean?
Okay, so what it'll mean is that there's a couple things I can point to that are pretty interesting, right? So
Mm,
for one, um, marijuana businesses will be able to deduct from their taxes standard business expenses from their federal tax returns because it's no longer a Schedule 1 drug.
mm,
So it's more like a Tylenol or like that sort of drug.
okay.
Another thing that's actually, I think, really good is the Department of Veterans Affairs will be able to prescribe or recommend marijuana to veterans. And this is
Okay.
a story I did like a while back about how veterans have been clamoring for this kind of thing for years,
Mm,
primarily because so many veterans, either because of traumatic brain injury or other pain, like chronic pain issues, get addicted to opioids. And so I've talked to a bunch of different veterans rights groups and veterans themselves who are like, listen, pot's a lot better. Like, it doesn't ruin your life. It maybe helps with the pain a little better. And the problem is we can't get it from the VA because it's still federally illegal. We're federally a Schedule 1 drug. But what it won't do is you can still be punished for having it. Like, it's still like ketamine is another Schedule 3 drug. Like, there are accepted uses for ketamine. Ketamine can be prescribed. Ketamine can be around. You can have ketamine if you're prescribed it. But if you're like illegally selling like a lot of ketamine, you still could go to prison.
Yeah.
You could catch a federal charge for that.
Happens. Yeah.
Right.
Another thing, kids, don't sell
don't
large amounts of ketamine because you will probably be caught and there will be a problem. Yeah. Don't do that. We don't have
right. So it's not,
yeah.
So rescheduling doesn't decriminalize it from a federal level. There's still, it's still subject to crimes that are articulated in the CSA and other federal legislation. And then another, that's like the big headline of what rescheduling won't do. And then there's a couple other things that I think are important, again, from things I've covered. Like, one, so let's say you're in the United States and you have a green card or another kind of visa. If you catch a federal pot charge, you could get deported. It doesn't even have to be a federal charge. It can be a state or local charge. If they refer it up to the feds, like that is grounds for deportation under the terms of your visa. It's like, that's the rules, guys.
Yeah.
So we did a story about a guy named Canalt who lived in Virginia. He lived here since he was a child, young child, and he was busted and deported back to Jamaica, leaving his wife and young child in Virginia to fend for themselves for the most part. He's recently been let back into the country, which is cool. But that's the kind of thing that it won't change, which I think is important. And then another thing like that people don't talk that much about, but like both public housing benefits and student loans that come from the federal government, those can be taken away for marijuana charges. And sometimes they're not, sometimes they are, but this rescheduling will not do anything about that. And a lot of this is
away
actually
in the sense that you can't get federal housing or you can't get a student loan.
Yeah. I mean, yes. I mean, there are tiers of it. It's not like a black and white issue, but like it's on the table, And so like these sorts of things, so that's not going to, so rescheduling, it won't do anything about that. And you're still, so I think that's where there are pertinent issues why this is important to think about rescheduling versus descheduling. It's super boring to even kind of write it down and say it out loud. But I think that's why descheduling effectively no longer defines marijuana related offenses as a federal criminal offense. It can still be regulated by like other state laws and stuff like that, but it's different categorically. And so there was a bunch of senators, including, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, the New York senators, California senators, who all wrote the DEA and HHS saying, hey guys, let's go a step further here and actually deschedule it completely. And so that's sort of what's at play, I think, in the next few months, whether, which way the DEA goes on this, how that, how the Biden administration takes a lap on it or not. And, whether it's the kind of thing that means that it'll last too. So I think that's why I wrote you and I was like, this is kind of a conversation I haven't seen being had in many places. And one that merits a bit more, speaking.
Yeah, no, me neither. Okay, hold on. There's so many things to talk about here. So one is that, because there's a lot in there. One of the important things is, as you're mentioning this, that Schedule 3 is, taking it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 is not different from descheduling, different from total decriminalization. That, for example, so it sounds like if I'm picking up what you're putting down here, it sounds like you're saying in the same way that if I get prescribed Xanax and I start selling that, I can't do that. Somebody's going to come and say, yo, okay, you got a date behind bars. Let's go. I'm going to have an issue. So similar to that, but I'm also thinking of you saying that, if somebody is here on a visa, they get deported, all these other things. You were also mentioning student loans and stuff like that. I'm thinking that this is going to end up hitting the same people that a lot of laws also hit when there is discretion involved, which is to say that, look, there is a law in Texas where if somebody suspects you are here illegally, they can just grab you, like police, right? Police can just arrest you. It's, stop and frisk essentially. Um, they're not grabbing people who they suspect. Like, I think that there is a European in our midst and we must get rid of this person. I suspect that this Frenchman is here illegally. This isn't happening. You know what I mean? This is going to tend to hit these same people that these laws always hit. And then of course things like student loans, the ability to improve yourself or improve your situation. Imagine having that taken away from you for something like this. Again, this is something that already existed, so perhaps this is mitigating what it used to be. But I can see why you're saying that there are advocates who are saying, nah, like, if we're going to do this, let's really do it. Let's go the step further and fully take this
Yeah.
thing off. Let's not half do it. So now we're talking about Biden taking a lap, which, let's be real, there are not a whole lot of things that Biden has been able to take a lap on. He's depending on who you ask. Like, I don't know if I know any true diehard Biden fans. Most of the talk I see about Biden is a mix of really pissed off. I had Evan on not too long, Evan McMorris Santoro, and we talked about the
Yeah.
the uncommitted vote. You know what I mean, in Michigan, and people are clearly pissed off. So it's a mix of like pissed off and he's somewhere in that in that spectrum. You know what I mean? So do you have any sense of if he's gonna if it's gonna lean toward actually taking the recommendation to totally deschedule this thing, or go with the Schedule 3, which sounds like kind of in the middle somewhere?
I don't have any reporting to back up any assertion which
Mm,
way it might go or the other. My sense is that the Biden, like, this is probably the sort of issue that doesn't even make his desk. Like, he's not going to pull the trigger on what happens. Like, this is thus far, Kamala Harris has been the person who kind of has been the
mm,
it's on her desk basically.
right.
And I think that a full descheduling, I don't know what the political downsides are to him for that or to the administration to do that, but kind of it's up to the DEA to make the decision. Like, that's the way the law works. And the
Right.
DEA is part of the DOJ, which is technically, supposed to be a somewhat
DOJ,
independent.
Department of Justice.
Yeah, sorry, the Department of Justice,
Yeah.
an independent agency under the executive branch. So yeah, it's sort of their doing, but I think I mean, to put it bluntly, it's still up to the cops. Like, it's their call.
And
uh,
in the case of Kamala Harris, actually, literally
an actual
up to the
cop, yeah,
cops, like an
exactly.
actual
Well,
cop,
not a literal cop, but yes,
not literal,
prosecutor.
not literal.
Yeah.
Yes.
But no, but I mean that because I think that's like incremental steps tends to be what ends up happening.
Hmm.
And there are clear benefits as we've articulated, but there's also some downsides as well. It doesn't go far enough for Drug Policy Alliance and other kind of standard bearers of the legalization movement to be happy about. And I tend to try to take like another 20-year view on this and be like, you know, it's a huge win for 10 US senators to write a letter to the DEA saying deschedule completely. Like, that
Mm,
would be unheard of 20 years ago. So yes, the
yeah.
Drug Policy Alliance and other advocacy groups are going to be pissed that this doesn't go far enough. But it is something. And I think
Mm,
that's where, if anyone even thinks about this on election day or in the preceding days and weeks, like, that's kind of where it's at. Plus, it's like, might be the last chance. It might be the last chance before a next administration comes in where I'm sure this won't even be on the table to even talk about. I'm not sure of it. It might be. Who knows? But
yeah. I was gonna ask. I mean, do you have any? Is there any sense? or have you heard any sense that Trump is interested in this also?
The closest I got to that is like for a while, Roger Stone was a
Oof.
proponent of legalizing pot.
Mm-hmm.
I remember at some conference I moderated a panel where he was on, and it was about pot, and it was at the time like he was just like, listen, this is a way. Like I've had a personal experience where it's helped a family member. It should be legal. Let's all come together and make this happen. I think
Mm-hmm.
another anecdotal thing that I would say is that those people who I've engaged with over the years who are heavy duty advocates for marijuana reform in one way or the other, it doesn't cleave as neatly to like progressive values as you may think. Like there are a lot of folks out there who wouldn't describe themselves as progressive or liberal at all, who truly believe that you have to get the government out of the way of pot, who
Mm-hmm.
think in those ways as well. So
Right.
but my sense is that again, it's not the kind of thing that would really move the needle on the base of the Republican Party in any way. So I don't think they're
Yeah.
going to do it. And I think, I can't quite remember if it was like a literal promise of the Biden administration before he came to office. And I should actually look that up. That's a really, I should look that up because if it was, then it's a promise he either keeps or doesn't, you know?
Right. Right. Yeah, man. I mean, again, I think the the sense that I'm getting from what you're talking about, and even the timing of it, and you're saying, it may be the last chance, which it may well be, depending on what the next administration is. But it also does seem like it is leading up to an election. I think the Biden administration is looking for ways to distinguish themselves from the opposition, or at the very least, partially remind people they're still there, but also, hey, we're still doing things you want us to do. Voters, please do this. And he's not doing great with younger voters, and younger Americans in particular are the ones that tend to be pretty, I'm going to say, displeased, say, with handling of Palestine right now. And I think we've probably seen some policy changes because of the voicing of that dissatisfaction. I'm going to say very diplomatically, dissatisfaction with the policy. And so, we're seeing some movement, but and I don't want to be cynical to say, oh, this is a ploy for votes. I don't want to do that, because I don't want to put it into that box necessarily, because this is something that could actually be relevant for a lot of people. You know what I mean? Like less penalties, that sort of thing. I mean, that is a win. The question is, does it stop there? Could we go further? And I think, and it sounds like that's what a lot of advocates are saying. Do you have any sense of if it does, say, if Biden did, or Kamala Harris did start pushing for actual, totally descheduling, is that something that is going to get some of these advocates to actually more vocally come out and say, yo, we need to get Biden in, we keep Biden in office so that we can actually make this happen?
I haven't heard anyone. I mean, the thing is, like, the polling on this is also equally not instructive to try to
Mm,
understand voter. Like, there's no single issue pot voters anymore. Maybe there
uh-huh.
are, but then on a federal level, it doesn't really seem to be the case. And I think if
Okay.
you look at the stakes of like what pot means, which can be life and death, versus other large policy decisions that are on the table at the moment, it can
Mm,
often be like, all right, pot's a little more minimal as far as
I see.
big issues. But I mean, that said, I think like um, it aligns to a certain set of progressive ideas, which are the war on drugs was racist.
Mm,
Institutional racism exists. We need to call it out where it is and fix it as best we can with the government that we have. And I think so. Whether or not it's like a distinguishing element to someone as to whether they will go out and actually vote, or ask their friends to vote, or take their friends and families to the polls or whatnot,
yeah.
it does remind a person that, hey, the government can do things that are obviously correct. And I think that like we don't know how
It is
powerful that
possible.
it's possible, right? So
Yeah.
there's that at hand. And I also, I mean, a couple of years ago, I talked to Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey as they were about to roll out
Mm.
legal pot there, recreational legal pot. And when you talk to, I mean, he's a progressive Democratic governor, but kind of not as progressive as some others. The mainline party line on this is like it does two things at once. Just like it gives revenue for the state, and it's a social justice issue at heart. And so I
Right.
think this is the kind of thing that very easily can be looked at as a political win and the right thing to do. And I think and you don't have to go the furthest that the advocates and activists want to be able to claim that win. And so I think that's basically where it stands.
We just sounded like a Schedule 3 and not descheduling. It sounds like that's
If I were, I'm not going to put odds on it or anything like that, but that's where I would see it. And of course, and I think it's because the DEA is kind of the determinant agency at the moment. And so I think they'll make a decision that's more aligned with DEA policy.
Yeah, a more conservative policy. Yeah, not surprising.
Which is funny because like the idea, I think ultimately behind the conservatism in all of these elements is to keep pot out of the hands of kids and to make sure it's not more of a harm. It causes more harm by becoming legalized. And I think what most of the data that comes out of the states as they report it is that net, it's a harm reduction strategy of making pot more and more legal, which is to say fewer people go to prison, which is to say fewer kids actually get access to it in the way that they used to. And I mean, it's not like as cool, I guess, as it was beforehand. That's part of it.
Yeah. You just go to this Apple store looking place and pick some up. It's like, okay, yeah.
Yeah. So I think like those are the two things that I think policymakers oftentimes really keep in mind. And like on the other hand, I'm not sure if we can get into all of this, but like the situation on the ground in a place like New York is so interesting and bizarre because there are so many, like any bodega you go to basically will have pot for sale. Like any, like if you go into Midtown,
yeah, here we go.
it's just immense what has happened. It's like the genie is out of the bottle in this like very bizarre way that I think a lot of people are scratching their heads saying like, wait a second, is this exactly what we were looking to do here? And I'm kind of like, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, so the headline on this is New York Mag. The weed bodegas have no fear. It's illegal to sell without a license. Not that this has stopped 1,500 stores and counting. So yeah, what's it like over there?
Well, so I'll give an example. I was like in Midtown in like the theater district like last week, and on 9th Avenue between like 50th and 49th, there was 3 dispensaries on the west side of the street.
Wow.
Which is like, I don't know how many of them actually were licensed. They were trying to get that kind of folks who are in town from around the country, but it's a bizarro land when you think about it. And a lot of the stuff that is being sold there isn't coming from New York. Like you can tell from the packaging that it's been packaged for a place like California. So, so yes, I think like the reality on the ground is that there are these designed systems for making pot regulated and legal, but people are always going to find a way to I mean, like there's structural reasons for that, like how much pot is grown in California versus how much can actually be sold. But there's also just the spirit of pot is that it's just going to find a way to like be creative and weird. Like that's just how it always has been.
Makes sense. Why? Maybe this is my last question, and this is something that you mentioned earlier. When you brought this up to me, I thought, why haven't I heard of this? And I've looked around and I've read around a little bit, and I'm not seeing a lot of people talking about this. What's going on? Are you just ahead of the curve? That's a good explanation, but
Yeah, I actually haven't really considered that question. Might I think that there might be larger fish to fry generally, like
Mm,
we're talking about like the future of a like our democracy. We're talking about I think that's what I would say.
mm.
The
Just
big
that there's bigger
moves
things happening in news right now,
and in the
policy
world,
wise.
yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
exactly. And during a lot of the stuff, well, I'll put it this way, like the big news of pot, like if it gets federally deregulated or descheduled or rescheduled, it's still not going to be as big as when California went legal. Like the first dominoes to fall were like the biggest and
Mm,
shook people the most. And now it's a kind of bureaucratic incrementalism that we see happening. Public opinion has already changed to the most
right.
for the most part. Like the big things have already happened. So I
Mm-hmm.
think like while this is a big story for people who are super paying attention to this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
for the average person who's paying attention to news or not, it doesn't mean a whole lot as their lives are changing these days. So I think that's effectively why. I think when it does happen, if it does happen in the next few months, like it will be a 2-day or 3-day news story, and we'll be like, okay, cool, moving on. Like
Wow. I I mean, just having been in the business for a little bit, the news business, not the weed business. For any feds watching, because not descheduled yet. Um, that sounds about right. I think that's a good take on it. I mean, I think what you've laid out here is I think a very reliable prediction. I think it's very predictable that this will, like you said, in the next few months, it's going to come up. It's going to be announced. I think the Biden administration is going to hope for some fanfare about it. I think it's also very reasonable to say, yeah, it's going to be a couple days. People are going to talk about it. There's going to be a couple explainers. Vox is going to make a nice explainer about it. You know, I mean, there's going to be some nice TikToks that lay everything out for you, explain what we just talked about, what's, Schedule 3, what's descheduling. And then we'll go back to whatever else we were doing before. That sounds about right.
yeah, and to a degree, it speaks to the like depressing state of our politics, which is like there's bigger things to talk about because so much of our politics is just people fucking lying about everything all the time. And so this pot is finally like in a rational state of public policy, whereas it wasn't for decades and decades, to in contrast to everything else that's going on.
Yeah. And one question in chat, which I think I know the answer to this one. The conversation about descheduling or moving to Schedule 3, whatever the case may be, that would not affect those people who were incarcerated over charges that have been happening. This isn't going to be retroactive. Like if you were caught up on charges, or is that part of the discussion?
Well, no, but I think the Biden administration already has taken some steps for the people who are in prison for
Mm-hmm.
federal cannabis crimes
Mm-hmm.
to both let people out of prison and to expunge records.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of that has happened,
Mm-hmm.
or they've said that it is going to happen. So I
Okay.
don't. So to the question is like, no, it won't actually affect people like that. But another thing to think about is that there aren't that many federal inmates who are in prison for small amounts of marijuana. A lot of it is like very heavy trafficking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we tried to, I remember, we tried to do this data journalism project for years now, like how many actual people. And it's a much harder lift than you might think. There's a place that's doing a good job from like a public policy slash nonprofit world called the Last Prisoner Project.
Mm-hmm.
They try to keep track of these things pretty stringently, but it's a big gumshoe reporting project where you actually call every jurisdiction and be like, so who's in your prisons and why?
Right.
Um,
Because they don't make the data easy to collect or easy to aggregate. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I've dealt with stuff like that before. Yeah. Just make this stuff easier. Like, what are you hiding? Explain what you're doing. I'm gonna ask you some questions. But yeah. Man. But yeah. So thank you so much for helping to break this down, man. I
Thanks for having
appreciate
me
it.
on, man. It was fun to talk about it. I'm a little rusty, I think, ultimately, but I found some of those grooves. Did you feel like
Wait, Rusty, how? What do you mean?
I don't know. I don't remember all the things that I used to be able to remember about this stuff.
Oh,
But
you're not rattling off the figures all the time. So
yeah, that's right.
you I mean, you were like, I've talked to this person, I talked to this person. You could have fooled me, man.
Okay, good, good. I'm glad.
You did. You did.